Okay. So Scream 3, the conclusion of the original Scream trilogy. This one is also directed by Wes Craven and has Neve Campbell returning as Sidney Prescott, as well as a few other familiar faces from previous movies in the franchise. This movie has a rather bad reputation among Scream fans. It's known as the lesser one of the entire franchise, and I can definitely see why. And I'll go into more detail in a second. I'll just say I don't think this is necessarily a terrible movie. I just think it's not that great, but I don't think it's as bad as some people say, but I do see why they have their opinion like that. And first off, I'll go into the acting. Neve Campbell does a good job as always, and as do the other returning cast, but you start noticing a major problem with this movie with how weak the rest of the cast are. No one really fills a good role. The characters aren't interesting. At least any of the new cast aren't. It's all just... They're all just kind of there. The new cast develop the characters more. Those characters are more developed and have good conclusions, but the rest of the cast is just fodder for the villain, and I've never really liked that about other slasher movies, and it just disappoints me that Scream went to that level. As for the cinematography in this movie, it's just kind of there. It's actually kind of way below the standards I had from the previous movies, as is the music. The music is about the same as it's always been. It actually reuses some of the music it's had from the previous movies, and it adds sometimes, but mostly it just gives you a feeling of meh. It's all rather disappointing, all things considered, because I rather enjoyed the cinematography and music from the previous movies. And now I'm going to talk about one of the weakest parts of this movie, which is the story. The story is just bland, boring. It's all over the place as well. It attempts to be meta, but it just falls flat on its face. It's just not that interesting in the slightest. It starts off good, but it just peters out and never really draws you in other than the main character's moments here and there. The kills aren't as good as they were in the previous movies, and like I said, the attempts to be meta are largely missed rather than hit, which is kind of bad because I actually like the meta nature of the Scream franchise. There are some parts of the story that are nice, but in the end, it just doesn't really hit home. However, the closing minute ties up the main cast story rather nicely, though it is a bit rushed, and the previous several minutes didn't really help it in the end. Overall, I say if you're a Scream fan, you should probably rent this movie and watch it, but I don't recommend buying it. And for anybody else, I just recommend you skip this rather disappointing and bland movie. And other than that, later. Bloopers, and there were a lot of them. Okay, Scream 3, the end of the original Scream trilogy. This movie is also directed by Wes Craven. It was also pretty successful at the box office. And it also has Neve Campbell returning as Sidney Prescott, along with some other, Why am I messing up? Okay, so now for the conclusion of the original Scream trilogy, Scream 3, a movie that was directed by Wes Craven like the previous two, and like the previous two has Neve Campbell returning into her role as... Okay, so now for the conclusion of the original Scream trilogy, Scream 3. A movie that was also directed by Wes Craven, and like previous movies, has Neve Campbell returning in the lead role as Sidney Prescott. I was on as... bleh. Okay, so now for the conclusion of the original Scream trilogy, Scream 3. An anime... Anime! God damn it! Okay, so now the conclusion to the original Scream trilogy, Scream 3. This one is also directed by Wes Craven, and this one also has Neve Campbell and others from previous movies returning for this movie. Yeah. The finished to the original Scream trilogy, Scream 3.